Welcome very, very much to this morning's session. We've titled it Noticing Nature in Lockdown and Beyond. And really this session is all about how can we savour nature? So how can we use positive psychology to really enhance our experience of nature and psychological well-being? And that's what we're going to focus in on. Now, I know as part of the Urban Tree Festival, those of you that have joined in today, you will have a natural affinity with nature and be passionate about nature already. So in some ways, we're talking to the already converted, but it might be that actually you have a desire to understand more around the science of well-being and really understand the evidence that connects our well-being to nature. So we're going to hopefully chat through some of that with you today. We're going to keep it quite informal and encourage some conversation, but we will be sharing some theory and some of the evidence base with you, just so you get a sense of that too. And I suppose just really quickly, before we move into the session, we also want to give a nod and appreciation of what we're all going through right now. It's obviously a very challenging time for many. And we'd love to, I suppose, just check in on how are you feeling right now. So in the chat box, if you're feeling comfortable with sharing this, on a scale of 1 to 10, how are you feeling? So 1 is really struggling and 10 is top of the world. And your name and the number, if you're happy to share your name and why you might be feeling like that. And we're just going to get a sense of how people are on the call right now. And Michelle and I are both psychologists and positive leadership experts, and for us it's really important that we engage with how we're feeling and get a sense of that, and acknowledge that in this webinar we're going to be sharing some ideas, some support, some suggestions for using nature to support your well-being, but we appreciate it's also a very strange time right now, and we just want to acknowledge that. So what's the kind of feedback we're getting, Michelle?
Yeah, so thank you, Jane. You're our first contributor. Jane says she's an 8. She says, I like the quietness and the way the world has become still. I think that resonates with a lot of people right now, actually, Jane. Thank you for sharing that. Fiona says she's 6-ish.
Okay.
Very much in the middle there, Fiona. Helen Jones, Helen's a 5. She says, I'm shielding, I haven't got a garden, nice weather days are the hardest, as normally I'd be in the park. Yeah, that heart's going out to you there, Helen. I think, again, a lot of people experiencing the same thing. That's really difficult, isn't it? Lenka says a 6. I miss my partner and communities, trying to find new things to keep myself occupied. Elliot's a 7. Lots of ups and downs, but on an upward trajectory, learning to come to terms with life as is. Laura is a 7, feeling quite good, less stress with no work pressures, enjoying having time for my hobbies. Paul is a firm 7, it's sunny. Yeah, that's enough, isn't it, Paul? Snowpug says 6. Nearly 6 weeks of coronavirus now, so stuck bedbound and can't leave the house.
Oh, wow.
And then Matilde says 7. Today I'm feeling well, really grateful with the Urban Trees Festival, events to help me feel connected with like-minded people. Gorgeous.
Excellent.
Vince is a 9, Emily is a 5. You getting this sense here?
Yeah, okay. Thank you so much, Michelle, for sharing, and thank you everyone who's sharing on the chat. That we really appreciate your honesty and reflections there. Some differences in the way people are feeling, and also some commonality of feelings as well. I think it was Helen and Lincoln mentioning around not being able to get out and enjoy nature perhaps, or be part of their community as normally would be, and I think we're all sensing that, but I know a couple of people there have also mentioned being able to have more quiet time, more reflection, maybe feeling less pressures around different things, which is lovely. In this session, what we're hoping to do is maybe share some ways that you can engage with nature, perhaps from the comfort of your own home if you're unable to leave, or if you are able to get out, also some other techniques for how you can engage with nature to support your well-being. So we'll talk you through those. So just, I suppose, really briefly introducing who we are. So I'm Cornelia, I'm the brown-haired one, you've probably noticed. And this is Michelle on the right, and we founded a consultancy called LiveWise. We are experts in wellbeing, resilience and positive leadership, and we work with a whole host of different types of organisations across sectors. I come from an education background, and Michelle comes from an arts and film background, and we're really privileged to work across sectors in what we do, because obviously understanding our well-being affects everybody, no matter your background or what sector you work in. So it's really lovely to have that connection. We do a whole host of different things, and we won't bore you too much about that, but if you want to find out more, you can go onto our website, livewise.how, and we like to share blogs and tips and advice beyond what we're discussing today, nature. So feel free to connect to livewise.how and find out more. So about our session then, getting into the nuts and bolts of today, what we're going to do is we're going to explain what positive psychology is. The reason we're going to talk through this is sometimes positive psychology is slightly misunderstood. So we want to, I suppose, make sure we all have a common understanding of what that is, and basically it's around, also we've got a little bit of
yes, I'm identifying Corn. Leave it with me.
Thanks, Michelle. So we're looking at the scientific study of optimal functioning and how scientists have been applying it to examine our experience of nature. So positive psychology, really, and Michelle, chip in here, some people often think it's about purely thinking positive and just having a positive perception of the world. And in fact, positive psychology is a branch of psychology which moved from the late 90s, early noughties, to get psychology to start to focus in on what is it that is going well in the human being? What is it that makes someone flourish, function really, really well? What is it that makes a team or an organisation function, flourish really well? So where traditionally psychology had looked at ill health and what creates certain psychological dysfunction, positive psychology flips that and looks at what is actually going on that's really helping someone here to thrive, whether it's an individual or a team or an organisation. But it's not about that positive thinking and just purely positive thinking. It's more around inquiring appreciatively into what might be happening that's really good and how we can take from it. I thought you were going to say something,
Cornelia. No, I was just admiring your explanation.
And then one thing that we often talk to people around with positive psychology is looking at positive psychology interventions. So once we've understood, well, what is it that can help us individually or as a team or an organisation to function really well in order to develop our well-being, to develop our resilience, to develop our positive leadership, once we have that theory and understanding, actually, we are great believers in applying what we do. And so we are applied psychologists. So we take what we know in positive psychology and we help individuals, teams, organisations to develop that and build that. And so one of the concepts which is relevant to when we're looking at nature and how nature can improve our well-being is understanding positive psychology interventions. So these are particular techniques that you can use to increase your positive emotion and happiness level. And as I said today, we're going to be particularly looking at those that are focused on nature. We're also going to be sharing some of our favourite and recent experiences of savouring and noticing nature. So I will apologise in advance that you have some embarrassing pictures from me coming up later on in this session. But I think it's really important that I and Michelle, we walk our talk. We don't just talk what we say. We actually use a whole range of different techniques, interventions to build our own well-being, and we are both firm advocates of using nature to support our well-being. So we're going to share some of what we've been doing recently so that maybe it inspires you or even resonates with you, because it might be that you're doing some of this stuff already but just didn't know it was a positive psychology intervention. And then at the end of today's session, we're going to encourage you to have a think around and explore around how could you savour nature deliberately in your day-to-day with tried and tested methods and creations of your own. So how could you, following this session, go out into the world, or at home if you're having to shield and stay at home, how can you, from the comfort of your home, engage with nature in a way that helps promote your own well-being? And we're going to ask you at the end to create your own experiment for a couple of weeks. So we'll come on to that a bit later on. And as I said again, we want to keep this interactive, so please do share any of your favourite nature stories and experiences which are relevant to what we talk through, and Michelle will very nice interrupt me as we go through. So,
yes, I'm looking forward to that, everybody. Looking after the chat box and hearing all your experiences and your reflections. I'll stay on top of it, Corns.
Okay, so what is positive psychology? We've already spoken a little bit about this. It's about understanding and the development of optimal human functioning across, individuals, teams, organisations and systems. And it's all completely based on research, and what we know helps us to thrive and applies it into the real world. As I said before, it's moved psychology from a deficit focus to what works focus in the early noughties. And it's the key science that underpins what we know about well-being. So as positive psychologists, we've spent years understanding what is well-being and what do we know about it and how can we enhance it. And as I've mentioned, we have these interventions, and there are a whole range of interventions, but we're going to focus on nature today. So what do we know about positive emotions and nature? So nature's evidence to increase two types of what we know about our well-being. That's the hedonic and eudaimonic well-being. Now, some of you might get a sense of what those words mean already, but just in essence, happiness and well-being comprise of both aspects of well-being. So hedonic well-being, hedonic happiness is achieved through experiences of pleasure and enjoyment. Just spotted a spelling error there, forgive me. High levels of positive effect and low levels of negative effect. So happiness for the sake of happiness' sake. So when we're experiencing hedonic well-being, it is those emotions such as joy and pleasure. So I like to think of it as kind of fun fairground happiness, when you are completely lost in a sense of pleasure. The other aspect of well-being, eudaimonic well-being, is achieved through and focus more on the experience of meaning and purpose. So this is a happiness that stems for individual and social good. So it might be that you carry out an act of kindness and it makes you feel extremely good in yourself, and a really heightened sense of meaning and purpose. And what's lovely about nature, and when we've looked into the science that underpins how nature affects your well-being, is it increases both your hedonic and your eudaimonic well-being, which is quite unusual for different types of interventions to be able to trigger both areas of your well-being. So it makes you experience that joy as if you're at a fun fair round, that real intense burst of a positive emotion, but it also makes you experience that real contentedness of being connected, finding meaning and purpose in your world. So that's really heartening, I think, for us to understand as nature lovers, that we're benefiting our well-being on two different levels when we engage with nature. So one key mechanism in which we're able to do this is savouring. And savouring might feel a very familiar term to some of you. It might feel very new to others. I remember quite a few years ago when I came across this understanding of savouring, and Michelle, I think I remember us having a conversation around this, that savouring is almost something we do that we potentially can take for granted, but I think over recent years both you and I have started to understand that real mindful savouring, that practice of deliberately savouring, and here we've got Brian and Vera talking about that, noticing and cultivating and harnessing our positive experiences is much more effective when you really truly understand what savouring means. So I think my knowledge of savouring has deepened a lot over recent years. Is that the same with you, Michelle, would you say?
Yeah, for me, savouring's very important positive psychology intervention, because, as we learn when we work in psychology, the mind is really Velcro for bad experiences, and it's Teflon for good experiences. We really hang on to those bad experiences. And so savouring, for me, it really gives me an opportunity to actually get into those good experiences as well, which otherwise we so often just let them pass us by, don't we?
Yeah, really, really good point. I really like that analogy as well. So just to, I suppose, to explain a bit more and to go deeper with the definition then, savouring is basking, thanksgiving, marvelling and luxuriating. So there are 4 different ways that we can truly savour and, you know, not let those positive emotions just fleetingly pass us, as Michelle was just discussing there. And there are different ways we can savour and appreciate anything. Now, obviously in this session, we're talking about nature, but actually savouring can be helpful in all ways and all aspects of any positive experience that you're having in life. And what's also really lovely about savouring is that you can savour in different time orientations. So right now, it may be really difficult, understandably, I think for some people who've been sharing on the chat who are going through particularly challenging times, to savour the present, but we can actually really fully savour the past. So we can savour some incredible things that have happened to us in the past that bring us that joy and that positive emotion in the present, which is lovely. Or we can equally savour the moment in the present, and we can also savour the future to come. So some of you may be thinking around what's going to happen in the future and how you know, just even thinking about the things that you might want to do in the future can increase that positive emotive experience. So there are so many different strategies for savouring, and feel free obviously to go away and to look at this into this further, but there can be things such as sharing with others. So having a telephone conversation where you share with others something you're savouring. You can build memories to savour. There's loads of different ways you can savour an experience. And we're going to talk in a moment now about nature and how we savour that. So what we wanted to talk to you about today was one particular way that you can really savour nature in order to support and develop your own well-being. And this particular intervention is called Noticing Nature. And actually, Michelle told me about this intervention a few years ago. And so this, I guess, is the real test. And this is actually an experiment that you can all do on this call, is to notice nature. And some of us will be able to do that by going out into nature, and some of us might need to think about how we can do that at home. And that's absolutely great. Both are effective. So nature interventions have been evidenced to improve many aspects of well-being. And this includes life satisfaction, positive effect, and meaning in life. So isn't that lovely that actually if we engage with nature, it can increase our life satisfaction, our positive emotions, and the meaning that we have in our life. Now, this particular intervention called Noticing Nature aligns the concept of savouring within a nature context. So it takes what we were discussing with you in savouring and it brings that savouring into the natural context. And so what is this? What can I do? What intervention can I put into practice? So what this entails is over a period of 2 weeks, you pay attention to how nature and your everyday surroundings makes you feel. You can photograph objects or scenes that evoked emotion in them and provide a description of emotions evoked. So, for example, it might be that you're at home, but there are objects, for example, within your house or outside of your window that you can see that can capture a natural experience that you really engage with. And if you can savour that by taking pictures, by making notes around how they make you feel over a period of 2 weeks, that would be you carrying out the Noticing Nature intervention. Another way you can do that, if you are able to get out of the house, is to go out to a green space or even a tree that you pass. And over 2 weeks, pay deliberate attention to a natural space and notice how it's making you feel, photograph what you're seeing, whether it's a park, whether it's a tree, whether it's a leaf, and think about what emotions it's evoking within you and provide a description of the emotions evoked. So this is some of the things that you can do. The results of this, so this Noticing Nature positive psychological intervention has been carried out repeatedly and shows a whole host of results, and more often than not, it increases positive effect, elevates experiences, and creates a general sense of connectedness. And this connectedness is felt to people. So I think someone earlier in the chat mentioned feeling a little bit disconnected at times. So this can help us reconnect, and it can help us feel connected to people, to nature, and to just life as a whole, and feel really pro-social as well. So that's the test. is this really true? So who knows better than actually everyone on this call to tell us if they think this is actually true? So as a kind of mini experiment of that Noticing Nature PPI, I want you to look at this picture of a tree, and I want you to really, really look at it. I want you to focus on it. I want you to inspect it. How does it make you feel to look at it? And what do you notice? So I just want you on your own, just to look at that, focus it, inspect it. How does it make you feel, and what do you notice? And then in about 30 seconds, we're going to take some feedback on the chat.
And I think, Horns, we're going to do feedback on chat, but if anybody does want to unmute themselves and would like to speak to how they feel as well, then you're very welcome to do that as well. But if not, just write it into the chat and I'll read it out for you.
Definitely, thank you. Okay, so what's coming through in the chat then? How is this making people feel when they really examine the picture?
Okay, so Helen Jones, my bird feeders have been my saviour during this time. That is lovely, Helen. Let's see. Fiona says calm, relaxed, sense of euphoria. Sarah says bathed in light, warm and calm. Hannah says comforted, warm, at ease. Melanie says alive. Emily, yes. Oh, you unmute, Emily.
Hello.
Emily Robertson. Hi, are you there, Emily?
I feel relaxed and in awe, but also part of me is thinking, has that been photoshopped or enhanced in any way? I think that's the skeptic in me.
It's a bit of picture getting a bit cynical.
It's really interesting. Notice that, Emily.
Thank you, Emily. That's very interesting.
Yeah.
Laura says a sense of awe. Elliot, connected, magnificent. Heather says the dappled light is beautiful, makes me feel happy, inspires me to go on a walk in woods. It brings back memories of long summer walks. That's that going back into the past as well, savouring across time periods. And Helen, a different sense of time is evoked for me, slower. Nature slows us down, doesn't it? Liz, the light filtering through the green leaves makes me feel lighter inside, gives me hope. Michelle, strong connection with trees, with nature. Dipesh, free and happy with a big smile on my face. Oh, Raki, you're using your husband's Zoom. The front image reminds me of young birds. This is Vince being nurtured by the tree. Very touchy feeling. We've
really
got a couple more corns. It makes me feel calm, Jane, and at peace. Light and shade, branches reaching for the sky. The green is lush, clean and fresh. It makes me feel as if my spirits have been lifted. Kim says awe. Awe is a really big thing in nature. Puts problems in perspectives. Nature is greater than us and keeps surviving and growing. And Len, this is the only tree in the forest that is old and not straight and tall. It's making me feel happy, but also a bit sad. It evokes that it might be chopped to be replaced with a new tall tree. Thank you, Anka.
To reassure you, this is a protected tree, so it won't be chopped. So we'll look after this tree. But really interesting. Thank you so much, everyone, for sharing. It's really interesting.
And sorry, we'd had Stephanie raised her hand as well.
Oh yes.
It's only because I'm not very good at the typing thing.
Of course.
No, it's great. It's lovely to see you.
Yeah.
So much of what everyone has said, but the other thing that struck me going back to the tree being old was that would have been shared by so many other people before me, and that kind of gave me a feeling of connectedness with other people who'd enjoyed that wonderful view as well.
Really lovely. Thank you very much, Stephanie. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
It's really lovely. And so I'm going to ask everybody to do the same with this. So looking at this picture of trees, I want you again to really look at it, focus on it, inspect it. How does it make you feel to look at it? What do you notice? So it might be that you're experiencing something similar. It might be that you experience something different. So just take a moment to really inspect it and notice it and see how you're feeling looking at it. So how is this making
Fiona is saying she breathed deeply because she imagined the scent would be heavenly. That's exactly how I felt, Fiona. Oh, Hannah said, it's really interesting. Hannah says claustrophobic and overwhelming.
Yeah, interesting.
And Mel, hi Mel. Mel says spiritually connected, all is one, beautiful. And Jane says I feel warm, comforted, held tight. And then Lenka says, interestingly, this is making me analyze the trees as a part of the urban fabric, how the canopies are overshadowing the street. Liz says, this time I feel oppressed, although I love the blossoms. This is bringing out some very different feelings.
Yeah.
Rochelle says, magical, like spring, fresh and exciting. Vince, however hard I concentrate on the beauty, my eyes are drawn to the signs. That kind of tension sometimes between nature and the built environment. Helen says, if I block out the signs, I feel calm, but the red keeps drawing my eyes back. Raki says, it makes me feel like it's pretty, but I know I have to savor it because the busy bit is coming. Mathilde, cathedral-like, torn between the wondrous colour of the nature and the human traces.
Really interesting. That's lovely. So, you know, even though this is equally a picture taken from a natural environment, we're all having different experiences of the different pictures based on our own feelings, context, situation. And later on, when we encourage you to go away and do your own experimentation, you know, notice what makes you feel the way you want to feel versus maybe not feeling as connected, and just engage with how you want to feel at any given time. Really interesting feedback there. Thank you very much. Should we take one more bit of feedback, Michelle? Is there coming through? Or?
Yeah, a couple of other. Michelle says, felt the intrusion of people and human-based signs in this picture. It somehow detracts. And Sarah, similarly, beauty, but the signs are jarring, inorganic, harsh, whilst that lilac is gentle.
Really
And just, did anybody want to say anything in their own voice without me interpreting the tone for you? Feel free to unmute, but no pressure at all. Vince says signs and people, distractions.
Yes, really interesting. Okay, thank you very much. So moving forward, just again to share a bit more of the theory and what we know from the evidence. Engaging with nature in this way has been shown to really help with coping. And obviously different people going through different things at the moment, thinking around how to cope. Quite often, you know, we need to handle challenge, and it's really essential to handle challenge, but sometimes we handle challenge in a reductive coping way rather than a full-bodied enjoyment of life way. And connected to this, when we think around a theory of biophilia theory, this shows us that as human evolution took place with the natural environment, we have an innate need to connect with nature to support psychological well-being. So in fact, whilst we may often cope in a way that is very reactive or short-termist, if we can engage with nature when we're trying to cope, it can really make us feel a much more humanly engaged sense of coping. And this savouring nature, so this savouring and really noticing nature and engaging with nature can really reboot our coping mentality and establish a new set of positive mental habits. So a way of engaging with the world that's quite different to perhaps how we may previously be engaging or afterwards engaging. And Michelle's going to talk to us a little bit in a moment about some of that positive mental habit and connection, and how that can reboot our coping her own Noticing Nature intervention that she's going to talk to us about in a moment. So I wanted to, I guess, walk the talk a little bit here and share some of what I've been doing in lockdown in terms of noticing nature. So when we first knew everything that was happening around the current context, I remember quite vividly and took pictures quite vividly of being in particular natural environments that had a really big impact on me. So I'm just going to share some of this with you, which I hope is interesting, and I'd love to hear some of your reflections as well in the chat too. So some of my noticing nature experiments, this picture here, this was actually on the first day after we had been told that we, I suppose in essence, had to all stay at home and stay safe, etc. And I remember going that day to walk to a nearby park in Crystal Palace in southeast London. And just as you enter into the park, there's this lovely flower bed here. And I was going for a run and my head was probably in multiple different places. And looking at this flower bed literally stopped me in my tracks. And it really sprung out at me. And I couldn't help but really zoom in with my eyes into the flowers here and really notice the colours that I was seeing. So that red really jumped out at me, that light purple, the green. And I felt incredibly engaged in that moment with nature and what was around me. And I took some notes here for myself just after it happened, and I'd taken the picture. And it made me really pause and be present and know where I was. I think mentally I was in multiple different places, but when I looked at nature here, I could only be in one place. And that was really grounding for me. And I felt really connected to the land. I felt very connected to the world that we're part of. And I also had a sense of gratitude start coming through me in my heart and in my mind. I felt very grateful to be able to see these flowers, and the fact that someone had planted these flowers and gone out of their way to create such a beautiful entrance into the park. So it's really reassuring for me. The second picture I want to share is a little bit different, and this is my mother and my sister at the bottom, and they will absolutely be mortified if you see this picture early on in lockdown. But I know that it's a lovely story to share. But my mum is, I suppose, in the vulnerable category, and she's over 70, and she also is a carer. So she is having to, socially isolate quite a lot. And just the day before, there was I suppose, an instruction more for her to lock down. We were practicing socially distancing with one another. So I think Michelle and I prefer to call it physically distancing and socially connecting. So my sister and I went for a walk with my mum to her local park, which is in East London, a place called Valentine's Park. And it was just when the blossom was starting to come out into burst. And I was walking with my mum and my sister, and it felt very strange that these two people who I had been incredibly tactile with my whole life and very connected with, were a very touchy-feely family and love cuddles, etc. And it was very strange for me and disconcerting to be walking with my mum and sister and not be interlocked arm in arm or hand in hand, as we often do when we walk through this particular park. And I remember they were walking ahead of me and I was walking behind them, and I could see this tree, and I just decided, actually, I really want to savor this moment. I don't know what the future holds, but I want to savor this moment. I want to take a picture. So I stopped them and asked them to turn around, and I took this picture. And later on, I noted down how reassuring it felt to see this tree that was familiar to me, but to see it making change. And to know that I've seen that tree before with my sister and my mum when we've been able to be closer to one another physically. And I'll see that tree again in the future, and I'll see the blossom again. And it just in that moment, I just felt the thought passing through my mind that everything will be okay, and that I felt really connected to them, even though I couldn't hold their hand or hold their arm. I felt really connected through nature and in that environment. And it might be that some of you have had that experience again, or a different type of experience. And feel free again to share on the chat. And then I'm going to, I suppose, talk through a third example. Are there any examples coming through? Because I don't want to miss out on anything that's being...
Look. Well, Vince is just reflecting that it looks, I think maybe that was for the flowers before, Vince, that had been planted.
Yeah.
But he said that looked a bit man-made, or person-made, which I think you said it was, because somebody had planted them, hadn't they?
Yes, exactly.
And he says the tree could have been the key link to your memory. Without them, maybe you did take a picture of the tree. I'm not quite sure, Vince, I'm not quite sure what you mean by that, Vince.
Feel free to add a bit more on that, so we can understand. But thank you for your feedback.
Thank you, Vince. Emily would like to unmute, so I think she'd like us to speak. Hi, Emily.
Hi, Emily.
Hello.
I live on the coast, so we don't really have as many trees around the area. But I find just looking at the sea, it's been such a constant in my life, and it seems to bring me back to all those happy memories and just the history that I have with it and my family. So.
Yeah, really lovely. Thank you, Emily, for sharing. I used to live in the south of Ireland for a few years by the coast, and just to see the sea and the experience that had, that really resonates with me. So thank you for sharing. And I want you to, as you're maybe looking at these examples we're sharing, think around what might connect for you. And so, for example, Emily, that sea environment sounds like it's really powerful. And we'll talk a little bit about that later on. And then the next example that I wanted to share of me noticing nature, I don't know if anyone else felt like this year, but for me, the cherry blossom this year felt so much stronger and vivid for me, and I don't know if that was because I was deliberately savouring that and taking more time to notice that, but it just felt incredible. And it was particularly resonant because I was actually meant to travel to Japan in April, which was incredibly fortunate for myself. And this is a picture of my husband and I. And we got married last year, and we were due to go to Tokyo in April and to see the actual cherry blossom there and to go for the cherry blossom season. And on the day we were meant to fly out, obviously we haven't been able to travel, and that's okay. There's lots of really challenging things happening for everyone, and that's wasn't a challenge at all for us. But we were thinking around how we could make some moments and some memories together. And as we were walking through Mayo Park, which is a park near where I live in Forest Hill, we were really struck by the cherry blossom, and it reminded us that actually we don't need to travel to somewhere like Japan to see the cherry blossom. And actually maybe we won't go to Japan, maybe we'll think more about actually preserving our environment and engaging with the cherry blossom that we're seeing all around us. But when I was walking through with James and we were looking at the cherry blossom, we both felt a real sense of euphoria and happiness and contentedness. And even though we may have felt some disappointment at not traveling, we felt extremely happy and lucky to be able to walk through our park and experience this locally for us. So they're just some examples of noticing nature that are personal to me, and I know everyone will have their own to share as well.
A couple of little bits of feedback there, Corn. Do you want to take them?
Thank you.
Vince says we all need to know much more about where we live, which I think really resonates with what you were saying.
Definitely.
Liz says there was a TV program recently showed the cherry blossoms in Japan that look absolutely amazing. And then what else have we got here? Lenka says, oh wow, I didn't even realize the cherry blossom season happened. I usually love the petals. I guess it's the disconnection that happened as a result of the situation.
But it's not too late, Lenka, because you can find really loads of pictures of this year's cherry blossom season online. So yeah, feel, you know, do re-engage with it. So don't feel that you've missed it for the moment.
And Mel says, my feeling is, why fly when we have so much in our own environment?
Exactly.
And that's really the point of this noticing nature intervention, isn't it? And Liz says, if you can't leave the house, images such as these help. So I hope you're taking a lot from that, Liz. I know I am, just looking at Cornelia's beautiful face. I love the husband.
And you may have pictures from the past, you know, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, or pictures in old photo albums where you can really take time, potentially at the end of this, to go away and experiment with noticing the nature from the past as well. Really lovely. Thank you very much, everyone, for sharing. And now we're going to move over to Michelle, who's going to share some of her noticing nature experience.
Thanks, Cornelia. So I'm going to talk with a bit of a longer term view about noticing nature, because I have been practicing this intervention since 2017. You can see on the screen here some of the photos that I took a couple of years ago. And there's not many positive psychology interventions which I've explored that I've been so consistently engaged with. Noticing nature has by far had the biggest impact on me, and actually this presentation has been a really good opportunity for me to dig into that a little bit. Why has this been so impactful for my life? So in winter 2017, when I started this, I had seasonal affective disorder, which I think I get pretty much every year. I know lots of us do. So I was feeling very burnt out and cynical. I was writing a paper for my master's, which is why I was experimenting with this intervention. My head was permanently in my laptop. I was very stressed out and frazzled. Now, I live in London, and I'd begun to create a bit of a narrative for myself that London was very hard, it was urban, it was grey, it was overstimulating, and not in a good way. And I was developing a really quite miserable sense of not belonging where I lived. As I began the noticing nature practice, the very first thing I began to feel as I shifted my attention onto the nature in my local area, and I was really only looking, you can see, you know, there are the trees down the road here. I was looking at leaves on the pavement and the beautiful colours of the leaves, and I was really just looking in people's front gardens. But as I began to shift my attention onto the local nature, I started to get a bit more of a sense of congruence and a bit more of a sense of belonging. I noticed that I just began to feel a bit more comfortable. So I'd previously begun to dislike small things like walking to the tube, because I'd become very stressed out about things like fly tipping, litter, rubbish, feeling that there were just too many people around, that overstimulation. I suddenly found that I was looking forward to walking to the tube, because I was looking at nature, and very importantly for me as well, I was photographing it. So that is part of the intervention. If you do it in its truest form, you take photos as well. And there was something about that was very engaging for me. It was really pulling my attention away from the rubbish and the litter and the things I was finding difficult into nature. The other thing that really happened was that it just made me slow down. Instead of just rushing from one place to the next with my head bent down, physically, it changed me physiologically. I slowed down, I was breathing deeper, and every time I stopped to take a photo, I was pausing and actually allowing a sense of kind of recovery to come into my world. So those were the things that I noticed right up at the top when I started doing it. Having practiced this for a couple of years now, these are the key benefits here on the screen for me, which I feel for myself. So increased attention, right? So it really improves my attention and my focus, cognitive recovery. It's allowing my brain to rest throughout the day at regular intervals. And then that helps to improve my sustainable resilience. And I think of sustainable resilience as a kind of everyday resilience. So an overview of how I think this all works, how all this maps together for me. And actually, Corns, do you want to click on to the next slide? Yeah. So one of the biggest teachings that the noticing nature practice has really highlighted for me is my relationship to technology. We all know, I think we all feel that tech and screens have become so dominant, and they're such seductive norms for us all now. But these distractions, the distractions of the digital age, they do make it much harder for us to focus our attention, our very precious, valuable attention, and stay on task. So switching between devices, screens, apps, constantly checking email, this really fragments our attention. And it starts to train our brains to underperform, because it makes it very difficult for us to concentrate for long periods of time, or actually even short periods of time. It also really fatigues our minds. So our directed attention is a very precious, but it's actually a very limited resource. It gets used up very, very quickly. So what we need to try and do is take regular brain breaks. So we have to have ways to do that actually allow our mind to rest. So that's not what I might have done previously, which would have been scrolling through Instagram or checking my email or getting lost in a news feed. That might have been the sort of thing I would do when I took a break for myself. Okay, but our brain, from a brain perspective, our brain doesn't recognize that as a rest. It actually recognizes that as ramping up and fragmenting and being very distracted. So one of my biggest takeaways from the Noticing Nature intervention is that nature is providing us with the most amazing way to achieve these brain breaks. Why is this? Well, nature engages a kind of soft fascination. And this is a theory by some very influential environmental psychologists, Rachel and Stephen Kaplan. We know it's wonderful to look at a tree in the city. For me, that's where I live. It moves gently, it's full of harmonious colour, it's fascinating. But the Kaplans would say it's softly fascinating, because unlike tech and screens, it's not offering us lots of other attentional options. Okay, it's not beeping or buzzing or creating distracting background noise. Right? It's not inviting us to compare it to other trees. Oh, how does the oak tree look against this tree? Right? There's none of that. So it's not demanding our attention. Right? It's inviting our attention. So trees are interesting, but they're not too interesting, because there's no taxing choices, there's no filtering for the brain to do, genuinely offering us moments of true cognitive relaxation. And that really allows us to recover that very precious attentional focus, our concentration, and restore it. And this is all part of the Kaplan's attention restoration theory. And they say that there's 4 steps to mental recovery in nature. So the step 1, when you begin to move into nature and you just look at something, and for me this was just walking down the road, remember, looking at trees in urban London. Step 1, clear ahead or concentration. This is a mindful state where we allow our stressful thoughts, they just slide away into the background a little bit as we begin to focus on nature. And then step 2 is mental fatigue recovery. And that's where our concentrated attention begins to recover a little bit. It's that feeling of your brain resting. And for me, I literally feel like that, as though my brain takes a sigh of relief when I suddenly look at nature. And then we move into that soft fascination. That's step 3, the Kaplans would say. And that comes back to savouring, as Cornelia so beautifully showed us. Okay, that's allowing ourselves to be gently engaged in nature and just embracing that full sensory experience, the colours, the shapes, the scent of the tree, the noise of the leaves, the movement, the gentle sway. And then step 4, reflection and restoration. This is where our sense of relaxation might start to pervade a little bit. That's the brain restoring itself. That's conserving your attention and your energy. And you might start to have some good ideas here. Something I notice all the time, when I give my brain a break in nature, I'll suddenly have a much better idea or a creative idea. And then when you return to what you were doing, you just feel better. It just feels nicer. So I guess my big clarion call around nature is, instead of waiting, which is what I used to do, waiting for your weekend or your holiday to engage with nature, just find ways to drip feed it through your day consistently as you can, because that's going to start to really rest your brain routinely, and that's where you can start to build some sustainable resilience for yourself. And we can do that all completely for free by using nature. And we can do that if we're indoors, just by looking out the window, or if you're me, staring obsessively at your cactus plants. Okay? or you can step outside into your garden. Do it just by looking up and looking at the sky. And so, Cornelia, that's my experience. That's my longer term experience with nature. But I think you're going to take us through a bit of a savouring nature exercise.
Yeah, so thanks so much for sharing that, Michelle. It's really lovely. And hopefully you've been given a flavour, everyone on the call, for, you know, the impact that noticing nature has had for myself, that's had for Michelle over, you know, short periods of time or longer periods of time, as Michelle was explaining there. And I've noticed through the chat, we've had some really nice comments of people connecting to what you're saying, Michelle, there, which is really lovely. So thank you for sharing. What we'd like to do now is, because we never ever just talk to people and let people move away from the session forgetting about it, we want you now to think about something for yourself. So noticing nature mindfully allows us to savour across the three functions: prolonging the experience, intensifying the experience, and shifting gears to savouring. And we want you to do that now. So here's a question for everybody. And this is back at you. So reflecting on your own context, what would you like to do in the coming days to notice nature and savour the experience of doing so? So reflecting on your own context, so we all have different contexts right now. What would you like to do in the coming days to notice nature and savour the experience of doing so? And we want to add to that, would you like to try 2 weeks of noticing nature through what you'd like to do based on your context? So please just write in the chat now, have a think, takes a few seconds to just reflect, what would I like to do? Bearing in mind my context, how I'm feeling, what's going on for me now, what would I like to do to notice nature for a period of 2 weeks? What would I like to do? Is it related to the sea? Is it related to my local park? Is it related to looking out of my window on my street? Is it about researching images on the internet of cherry blossom season that we may have missed out on? Anything that you would like to do is totally up to you to decide now. So just have a think, and then when you've had a few seconds to think, you can just share some thoughts. So we're just going to be quiet, because we're never quiet, for 30 seconds, and just let everyone have a think about that. And of course, if anyone wants to share verbally and not chat, because I think Stephanie and Emily, for example, prefer to talk, and that's absolutely fine. Okay, so let's hear what experiments we have unleashed and what everyone's going to be trying on the back of this call now to build up your own personal well-being. What's coming through, Michelle?
So Helen says, I feel I'm already quite tuned into nature. That's great, Helen. Noting down what I see, but I want to add in noting down my emotional reaction with that really powerful thing to do, Helen. Definitely. Laura says, I have a good sized garden and spend a lot of time looking after it, weeding it, watering it, etc. I keep forgetting to stop, sit back and enjoy it. I will try and sit in my garden more and just enjoy it and switch my brain off.
Lovely. That's great.
Fiona says, I will think I will take a daily photo. I lost you a minute, but I will take a daily photo of noticing nature in the grounds where I live. I love that, Fiona, staying very true to the intervention there. Fiona might be a purist. Rochelle, I want to go for more runs without listening to podcasts or music, so I can focus on the bird songs more and the baby ducks along the canal.
Oh, wow.
Love that, Rochelle. Oh, sounds are so important in nature as well, aren't they? Just
so important.
Intrinsically relaxing.
I noticed that when I was running the other day, actually, I needed to just take those earphones out and just hear the birds. Yeah.
Lenka, I'd like to notice the Thames more, how it changes, and reflect on how that affects me. Great, Lenka. Michelle, I do a sit spot in my garden every day. This is sitting quite still and noticing what happens, trees, birds, for about 15 minutes. Sitting quite still, it is never the same. And that's it, Michelle. That's that soft fascination right there. Vince says, my context is I live in a countryside, it's full of nature, which I've become far more interested in. I think I should like to become more detailed. As an example, listen to birdsong, maybe identify different bird species, maybe it's looking more closely at tree varieties. I like that, Vince.
Yeah,
attention,
really interesting.
some attention to the detail.
Yeah, intentional focus.
Emily, I would like to learn more about the local bird life so I can identify different gull species I see on my walks. It would be handy to try out for 2 weeks and see if I can learn. Exactly, Emily. And also, Emily, see if you feel different as well. How does it feel if you do that for 2 weeks?
Excellent. And does anyone want to share verbally? Any of our verbal sharers?
We've got just two minutes left.
Yeah. Anyone who prefers not to type? No. Okay. We'll carry on then. And please keep sharing your feedback. We would love to hear how you get on. So please do share it back with us. There are some more things you can try. There are some suggestions that the amount of time you spend in nature is very important. There are a whole different things you can do. There's loads of information online. I noticed, Michelle, someone shared a really nice blog on the chat as well, but there is lots, if you want to do some internet research, there's loads of top tips out there of ways you can engage with nature. Please do keep in touch with us. There is much more of the festival to go, which is really exciting. There's some really lovely program that's been put together by the organisers, and you can find out more on urbantreefestival.org. You can also, if you'd like to make a donation, because this is obviously run completely by volunteers, you can find out more on urbantreefestival.org/fundraising and sponsorship. So if you go onto the website, you'll find that information there. And please do keep in touch with us. As I said before, we are www.livewise.how, and I'm simply Cornelia, CORNELIA at livewise.how, and then there's Michelle at livewise.how, and we love to hear from people. So see how you get on. Feel free to contact us. We're also
let us know
as well if you want to talk to us on LinkedIn. So I guess that's allows me just to say thank you so much